Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're doing part 217 of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights. We'll be taking a look at some of the wonderful mods people have been making and use them to talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So today we've actually got quite an interesting assortment of animals. Got a few extinct ones. We got a lot of subspecies today, but we've also got a lot of, big cats. I know everyone loves big cats. We've got some really cool extinct animals as well, and we've also got a bird, which always really cool stuff to talk about. But anyway, we should be getting started. So Sky Polaris seems to be dominating the day, but we've also got a couple of Great Cakes mods as well. But we're going to be starting off with these two different subspecies of Jaguar. So before I start, we're going to do these two a little differently, just because a lot of their information's on the Zoopedia. So we're going to just read through the Zoopedia and then have a look at these animals. So a lot of these subspecies now are considered defunct. So originally, there was up to about 9 different subspecies of jaguar described. They were all kind of based on skull differences. Because back in the olden days, taxonomy was done through morphology, or how ways animals looked. And the differences were enough for these taxonomists to be, different subspecies. And this was a really bad issue with a lot of animals, especially like brown bears. There was 86 different species of grizzly bear, and then they've all been lumped into one, which is just like the modern brown bear. Because really, through genetics, it shows that there's not actually that much genetically different between them, or not really much different in terms of their their actual relatedness to each other. They're just different morphologies, different local populations, probably adapted to deal with local conditions. So yeah, we're going to get started off with Sky Polaris' Central American jaguar, which we're going to have a look at here. So let's have a look at you. Really, really cool. They're both having a sleep, so we might just talk about Zoopedia while we got the chance. So this is I mentioned the Central American jaguar, or Centralis, Panthera oncocentralis. So Panthera oncocentralis, or the Central American jaguar, is a majestic and culturally significant subspecies of jaguar that inhabits the lush rainforest, swamps, and mountainous regions from Mexico through Panama. It's generally smaller than its South American relatives, but shares the same powerful build, massive head, and stunning coat of golden yellow background and black rosettes, each often featuring one or more central spots. This subspecies holds a profound place in Mesoamerican mythology, revered as a sign of power, the night, and the underworld by ancient civilizations like the Mayans and the Aztecs. So these guys are also a keystone species and apex predator, playing a crucial role in maintaining the health of Central America's tropical rainforests by controlling populations of peccaries, deer, tapirs, and caiman. And despite the ecological and cultural importance, it is classified as near threatened. It faces severe pressure from hunting loss and fragmentation due to deforestation for agriculture and urban expansion, which creates isolated populations and reduced genetic diversity. And they face all the same problems as kind of all jaguars across the world. And you can see where they're found here. They're typically found around the central bits of South America, in Central America. So, Panama, Mexico, Guatemala, Costa Rica, and all them. So some little things about them. In ancient Mayan culture, the jaguar was a sacred animal, believed to be guarding the underworld and a symbol of royal power. Kings often incorporated the jaguar in their name. Comes from the indigenous Tupi-Guanara word Yangara, which means he who kills with one leap. And Central American jaguars are strong swimmers, are found near rivers and wetlands. They're most powerful big birds to the side as well. This subspecies is a critical part of the Jaguar Corridor, a conservation initiative aiming to connect the populations from Mexico to Argentina. So that's quite good, to help with genetic diversity. Yeah, then we'll have a quick little look at these guys now that they're running around being cute. So, and as you sit down, but let's have a look at you having a eat there. Don't know what you're doing there, but you can have a look at these very, very cute little babies. Very, very cute little babies. That's the female. Let's have a look at the male here. So yeah, really, really cool. That's a cool one there. So Sky Polaris also did the next one as well. We have also got here the Coastal Jaguar. So let's start, as they're sleeping as well, we'll start with Zoopedia. So these guys are not actually even considered a distinct subspecies. They are considered a population of the Pantanal jaguar, which is Panthera oncocentralis. That's the other one. We're talking about Palaturis, or the Pantanal jaguar. So they are adapted to life along the Atlantic coasts and mangrove forests of South America. These jaguars are typically smaller and more slender than the inland cousins, an adaptation for navigating through dense tangled roots of mangrove swamps. Their coats often feature a brighter, more golden background colour with distinct, well-defined rosettes, providing perfect camouflage in the dappled light filtering through the mangrove canopy. So this population is a remarkable example of ecological adaptation, having a diet heavily reliant on marine and coastal resources. And while they still hunt terrestrial prey like capybaras and agoutis, they are expert fishers and known to hunt marine turtles and caimans and even snatch crabs from the mudflats. Their existence is intrinsically linked to the health of the coastal mangrove ecosystem, and they face all the same threats as most other jaguars do. And you can see they live in this kind of area here, the Pantanal. But one thing as well, as you can see, they obviously did live in the same places as the Central American jaguar. So very northernly Pantanal jaguar could easily breed with a Central American jaguar. So that's part of the reason why they're not defined as subspecies, and they seem to be one continuous population. But yeah, we'll have a look at some facts about them. So the coastal jaguars are among the most aquatic of the big cats, frequently swimming between islands and mangrove inlets in search of prey. They've been observed hunting sea turtles in a unique way, flipping them onto their backs on the beach to immobilize them. Their diet consists of up to about 60% of marine and aquatic prey, which is a much higher percentage than other jaguar populations. And they often patrol beaches at night, leaving distinct tracks in the sand that researchers use to monitor their populations. And they've also learnt the nesting seasons of sea turtles and will time their patrols to coincide with the arrival of female turtles on the beach. So that's quite cool there. So we'll have a look at this one, and you can kind of see some differences there. A little bit leaner and meaner, you can see. A little bit leaner, a little bit meaner. There's quite a nice one there. And you have a look at the cute little babies. Cute little babies, very, very cute little baby jaguar. You can see this one's having a swim over here. As you do. Really, really nice mods, Sky Polaris really killing it. But for our last jaguar for today, we're actually talking about an extinct subspecies that may actually be valid. So, as we covered, Panthera onca augusta, which was the North American extinct subspecies. This is Panthera onca mesobrenia, which is known as the Patagonian panther or the Patagonian jaguar. These guys are an extinct subspecies of jaguar that were endemic to the southern Patagonia during the late Pleistocene. It's actually known from quite a few fragmentary specimens. The first was actually found in the Cuellar de Meladon in Chile, and the fossils were referred to as a new genus and species as well, who thought they may have actually been a mythological species. But a later expedition actually found the skull of a large male jaguar, and that was described in detail by Angel Cabrera in 1934, and described them as created a new name for these giant felids, Panthera onca mesobrenia. And after realizing these fossils were just about identical to modern jaguars, there is some arguments that the validity of this subspecies is disputed. They could be just populated of large South American jaguars that went extinct. But some paleontologists also suggest this may be a synonym of the American lion, which is not really known from South America, which is very interesting. So yeah, as I mentioned, in terms of its taxonomy and stuff, near the farm, Herman Eberthold actually found a cave with the ground sloth Mylodon in it, and then found these remains as well down the radius and ulna. And there's been a few other kind of studies looking at it well. And actually, they did look at DNA from these bones, which is really interesting. And a 2016 study actually looked at these bones and obtained mitochondrial DNA and found that it did represent those of a true jaguar, but it belonged to a lineage of jaguars that was highly divergent from other populations of living jaguar. This supported the validity and independence of other P. onca subspecies. However, a 2017 morphological research into the holotype and other remains actually referred it to a lion, Panthera atrox, or the American lion. This conclusion has seen acceptance by some authors, but in his 2020 thesis, researcher Nicholas Fiumula argued that this could be a case of Bergman's rule, as typically animals at lower latitudes get bigger, and there's not much lower latitudes in Patagonia, so this could just be a particularly large population. And as you could say, in comparison with Augusta, which is the North American jaguar, they got quite large too, and they lived much more northernly, so higher latitudes. So they could be a great example of convergent evolution. And it's not an example of different genetics. it's more as you get lower latitudes, they just get bigger as part of Bergman's rule to conserve body heat. So it could be just a population of extra large jaguars that lived in Patagonia, just the same as Augusta could have been an extra large population of jaguars that lived in North America. So that's a quite cool way to explain it. But in 2024, there was suggested that the validity of the subspecies arguments for both Macrauchenia and the North American Augusta remain unresolved, since both these fossils and living jaguars show quite a considerable variation in morphometry. So that's basically how they, how they look. And I like the idea of potentially them being just large populations of southern of jaguars that live in higher latitudes, because you can see a great example of convergence in these guys, because they've got long limbs, bigger size, and they're very same as Augusta, and they live in opposite latitudes. So it's a great example of Bergman's rule, in my opinion. But they are considered to be the largest subspecies or largest population of the jaguar that have lived. 2017, there was an estimated body mass of about 231 kilograms or 590 pounds based on their type material. And this not only makes it one of the largest known jaguars by as much as 90 kilograms, it also makes it one of the largest known felids. And the trend for large body size among these Pleistocene felids may have been due to multiple factors, due to prey size, conditions, and also for Macrauchenia could be Bergman's rule. And a similar trend as gigantism has been mentioned in the North American subspecies Augusta, which was 20% or so larger than the modern jaguar and about 190 kilograms. And they kind of share the same stocky build of the modern jaguar, but to just a larger degree. So yeah, a great example of convergence within these two populations. So they share a lot of similarities with large that traits that living jaguars have, which is quite interesting. The teeth are actually remarkably large compared to other Panthera species, a trait that's shared by living jaguars. So very similar in pretty much all regards to modern jaguars, just a little bit larger. In terms of its skin and coloration, though, they actually have found pieces of skin from the face and limbs from potentially this subspecies, which was quite interesting. Nice, we get to see one swimming around too. The fragments had been collected from Fella de Mylodon and actually thought would to be fur of Mylodon, which is an extinct ground sloth, but actually was found to be one of these cats. And it suggests that its face was reddish with hints of shiny chestnut, and the limbs were dark overall with yellowish striping. He later called it a cat of beautiful colours, and notably actually a cave painting located in El Celebro in Santa Cruz kind of matched this description, and this featured guanacos, art of guanacos and human handprints. Show a large striped felid as well, and the reasoning for this coloration may be due to the native people revering the animal. So it's quite a common, it was quite painted quite large, and it has stripes, but you can also see there's lots of spots on it as well, so it makes sense, there's an animal lived there, the jaguar. And the colours shown being reddish brown, black spots, and lightly coloured forelimbs, and all these characteristics imply that they come from the same animal that have the skin. So this is what we know of the extinct subspecies of the Patagonian jaguar, or Panthera onca macrauchenia. So the holotype itself was actually found in a shallow, irregular pit, as well, and actually shows it may have had a puncture from another jaguar that bit it in life as well. So they may have had, like modern jaguars, they may have had fights just like modern male jaguars will have over females. What's really cool as well, it is found with fossils of Mylodon, which is a giant ground sloth, Hippolodon and camelids, so a type of horse and camels, so those kind of animals, and they have been shown with tooth and scratch marks based on this subspecies, or the Patagonian jaguar. And based on isotope analysis, it may have preferred to hunt Hippolodon and llamas, as well as a juvenile of larger mammals of Mylodon, because Mylodon was quite big, it was probably a couple tons. Evidence of dens of this backs this as well, as the llama and Hippolodon are actually more common in fossils, are common in these dens more than other species, so they likely preyed upon those species like camelids and horses. Those would be preferred prey. And the majority of the fossils were limb elements, suggesting that they would have dragged. What happens is the living felines burrows, and the food was taken back to these caves to be consumed. And though they one of 4 known carnivores in the cave, the fossils are actually more common and better preserved, whether species like Smilodon populata, which we've covered before, were actually represented by a handful of fossils. And modern jaguars and cougars are able to drag their kills long distances, and it's likely these guys were as well. Discovery of these isolated herbivore bones in a large carnivore-occupied nest suggests they were likely kills taken to be eaten. Mylodon, however, has been a frequent nests of Mylodon based on juvenile and newborns, so these guys may have been nesting in the cave, as we know sloths do across, the Americas. And, like the occasional sloth, jaguar might have got in there and gotten killed because it tried to get a baby. And, Mum was not very happy about that. Some of the prey items reached great sizes, as such of a skull of a 3 or 4 meter Mylodon actually showed quite large bite marks, so they got quite big. And coprolites containing Mylodon dermal ocellates, or, the kind of little bits of bone in their skin, was likely defecated by the species. So unlike Smilodon, which is probably a little bit more better adapted for, these guys were, for like those large and softer prey, these guys were quite well adapted for eating bigger animals, and, especially these ground sloths, which have, a bit of armor on them, and they've got the big bone-crushing jaws of modern jaguars, but exemplified by their larger size. So the majority of the sites where these guys have been found are very open and arid, when contrasting with the lush rainforests of modern jaguars. And this conclusion also backed by their diets, where they hunted grazing animals, whereas modern jaguars tend to hunt browsers like tapirs, anteaters, and peccaries. So that may have been the larger size, also been an adaptation to living in more open areas, since a lot of animals that have relatives that live in more closed areas tend to be smaller. So that's quite cool as well. And fossils have been found in southern Argentina and Chile, and Cueva de Mylodon is the southernmost site that it was occupied by these jaguars. And it got actually quite cold, with temperatures getting as low as minus 16 degrees. So they were probably quite good at that. So really, really cool example of an extinct subspecies, and a great contrast to, the North American jaguar. So I quite like the contrast of that. I think that's quite cool. I think that's very cool indeed. But yeah, another cool one there. Let's have a look at the baby. Very, very cute, as per usual. We'll have a look at the male as well. Where's the male? There he is. So there's the male, big boy. So the big Pantanal jaguar. Really, really, not Pantanal, Patagonian jaguar. Really, really cool to talk about this guy. But next up, we've got another extinct subspecies. This one is actually from a tiger this time. This is the Wanchens tiger. Let's have a look at these guys. It's also known by Panthera tigris acutidens. So these guys are an extinct subspecies of tiger that was first described in 1928 based on fossils found near Wanchens in southern China's Sichuan province. And it was originally named Felis acuidens, but then in 1947 it was considered Panthera tigris acutidens by Dirk Albert Hozier and Walter W. Granger. So in terms of the subspecies, the fossils that were collected of this guy are now housed in the American Museum of Natural History, and consist of 2 skulls, a humerus, 2 metacarpals, a tibia and astragalus, and 2 calcanea and 5 metatarsals, and several pairs of jaws. The tibia itself is about 29.7 centimeters long and about 8 centimeters in diameter, or between 11.7 inches and 3.2 inches in diameter. And the humerus itself is about 30 centimeters long, or about 12 inches, and slightly smaller than the width, length, and diameter of humeri of Sumatran tigers, so they would have been up there with the Bengals and stuff like that. And it would have weighed between 200 and 350 kilograms, or 440 to 770 pounds in body mass in life. So yeah, another subspecies of tiger. Not really too much to say about this guy, because of course, they're an extinct subspecies only known from a few bones, but still cool to have different subspecies and things like that. So really, really cool. Really, really cute as well. You can see very, very cute. I love a big cougar. Another one done by Sky Polaris. So lots of big cats today. But next up, this is the last mod of from Polaris, Sky Polaris today, but it's not a subspecies of cat. This is actually a primate, so I'm actually quite excited to talk about the one. This is the crossed river gorilla. So here's one of the females. We'll have a look at the males soon, because males are always considered the most impressive. But the crossed river gorilla, or gorilla dehal, is considered a critically endangered subspecies of the western gorilla, and was named a new species in 1904 by Paul Macrauchenia, who was a mammalian taxonomist. But the populations were not systematically surveyed until 1987. So these guys are considered the most western and northern form of gorilla, and they are restricted to the forest hills and mountains of the Cameroon-Nigerian border around the headwaters of the Cross River, and are separated by about 300 kilometers, or about 190 miles, from the nearest population of western lowland gorillas, and by around 250 kilometers or 160 miles from the gorilla population in Ebo Forest in Cameroon. So estimates in 2014 suggest there's fewer than 250 mature cross-river gorillas remaining, and makes it the world's rarest great ape. Groups of these gorillas congregate their activities and live in localities in about 12,000 square kilometers. The recent surveys suggest that these guys may have been found outside these localities and may have a much wider distribution than thought. And the distribution is also supported by genetic research, and actually suggests that many cross-river gorillas locales continue to maintain contact through occasional dispersal of individuals. So it's quite interesting as well. So originally, as I mentioned, they were first described as their own species of gorilla, of western gorilla. So there is the lowland gorilla and those kind of gorillas there. So this is its distinctiveness was confirmed in 1987, and subsequent analysis of cranial and tooth morphology looked at this and described it as a separate subspecies of gorilla in 2000. So it was originally considered its own species, but look into it, it's actually now considered to be its own subspecies. But comparing, so this is a species of western gorilla. Yep. So this is the western gorilla, or also known as gorilla. Comparing it to its other subspecies, the dominant subspecies, the western lowland gorilla, they have notably smaller palates, smaller cranial vaults, and shorter skulls, and they are not known to differ much in terms of body size or limb or bone length from western lowland gorillas, though measurements taken from a male suggest they may have shorter hands and feet, and larger kind of opacity index than western lowland gorillas, which is interesting as well. According to Sermenter and Oates study by the American Museum of Natural History, they have been described as having smaller dentitions, smaller palates, smaller cranial vaults, shorter skulls than western gorillas, and the Royal Belgian Institute of Natural Sciences depict them as the largest living primate, with a barrel chest, relatively even hair, a bareback face and chest, small ears, bear-shaped browns that are joined, and nostril margins that are raised. And they are clearly not the largest gorillas, and the distinctiveness of the exact characteristics still need to be verified. But in terms of sizes, an adult female like this would be about 140 centimeters in height, or 4'7", and weigh about 100 kilograms. But a male would get between 165 to 175 centimeters, or 5'5" to 5'9", and weigh between 140 to 200 kilograms, or 310 and 440 pounds. So some of the evidence of the evolution of these guys, we'll have a look at the male now, because he's obviously, we like to look at the impressive big male gorillas, the silverbacks. So in 2000, they actually suggested the hypothesis they began to evolve from, hypothesized that the cross-river gorilla began to evolve as a distinct subspecies from gorilla, or the western lowland gorilla, during an arid period of the African Pleistocene phase in response to declining food resources and a greater emphasis on herbivory and territorial behaviors. And the team stated that the ancestors of the Cross River gorilla may have been secluded in these forests near the Cross River headwaters or elsewhere in the Cameroon highlands. And they wrote they may have spent much of their time in isolation. And the gorilla ancestors differed from the Cross River gorillas by spreading beyond this area and some on the southeast in Ghana. And they have no evidence to suggest that these two subspecies are sympatric, so they are separated from each other. And like habitats, they prefer dense forest habitats undisturbed by humans, like other populations of gorillas. And due to this, body size requires large and diverse areas to meet these needs. And similar to most endangered primates, their natural habitat exists where humans are often occupying and using the natural resources. Forests that are inhabited by these cross-river gorillas vary in altitude from between 100 to 2,000 meters, or between 328 to 6,000 feet above sea level. And between 1996 and 1999, a lot of this field work looking into their, where they live and stuff like that, they found a lot about their behavior and things like that. Though, kind of obviously, they were considered to be declining and negatively impacted by forest deforestation and fragmentation. And this unfortunately leaves the gorilla species with few options for survival. a result of deforestation stuff that drastically reduces the carrying capacity of the populations, and the territories the animals inhabit is, significantly reduced. And because the areas of the population of humans is high, the amount of resources available to these gorillas are limited. And even though this decreases the availability of land may be a problem, they actually suggest there actually is still some adequate amount of rainforests for these subspecies to live on. However, human presence and activities towards deforestation continues and will diminish, and there won't actually be any more. Additional things that humans do that threaten this gorilla are, of course, hunting, logging, agriculture, fuel wood harvesting, and clearance of land plantation and exploitation of natural resources. And gorillas are really only a small part of these ecosystems along with other primates, and there's many other aspects. And furthermore, because of their body size, their lack of ability to adapt to new habitats, and their slow reproductive rate, it's very hard for them to keep up. And because of that, they're not only considered critically endangered by the IUCN, they're also considered understudied. And the limited territories of their natural populations has led them to be isolated from other gorilla populations. And during the 20th century, they were known to roam lowland localities, but due to humans, they actually now reside only in hilly areas, and this led to a decrease of resource availability to them as well. But most of the regions inhabited are legally protected due to the species' critically endangered status. However, there are still areas that are not protected. So sadly, there may be areas where these gorillas may still be prosecuted, and obviously, local people might not really care about that anyway. In terms of behavior, they are not too different to other species or other populations of gorillas. So they have certain nesting behaviors, so they depend on things like habitat. They will, depending on where they are, they will sometimes there's high correlation whether a nest is constructed on a tree or on the ground due to the season. So from April till November, they'll likely nest within a tree, and from November, they'll likely nest on the ground. So they found that more nests built on night on the ground as opposed to the trees, and they're more likely to construct nests during the wet season than the dry season, as well as construct more arboreal nests in the wet season, to kind of get away from the water. It's interesting as well. Typical groups of cross-river gorillas are typically one male or 6 to 7 females plus their offspring. We'll have a look at a little baby while we get a chance to talk about them. And their offspring, this one's fully sketching out. Yeah, no, that looks a bit better. Gorillas in lowlands are seeming to have fewer offspring than those in the highlands. That's probably because of the hunting rate of the lowlands and infant mortality rate, with the groups in the highlands being densely populated compared to these lowland areas. Cross River's diet usually consists of largely fruit, herbaceous vegetation, lilac and tree bark, and much like their nesting habitats, what they eat is contingent on the season. So overall, these groups, the gorillas, indicate they seem to prefer fruit, but they will settle for any source of nutrition during the dry season for about 4 to 5 months in northerly regions. And they eat more liana and tree bark throughout the year, with less fruit during dry periods due to their scarcity. And as I mentioned, they do live in groups of about 2 to 4 individuals, and they usually eat fruit, but in scarce months like August, September to November, January, they'll eat mainly herbs and things like that. Very seasonal diets as well, and we already talked about the nesting question. In terms of their distribution, the subspecies lives around the border of Nigeria and Cameroon in both tropical and subtropical moist broadleaf forests, as well, which is also home to the Nigerian Cameroon chimpanzee, which is another subspecies of great ape. The cross river gorilla is like the most western and northern form of gorilla, and is restricted to the forest hills and mountains of the Cameroon-Nigeria border at the headwaters of the Cross River. And we kind of also talked a little bit about that there. Habitat loss, we already talked about bushmeat as well. But in terms of their decline, the population of these gorillas has declined about 59% between the years of 1995 and 2010, with a greater decline over the period than any other subspecies of great apes. So these are the most declining subspecies, which is actually really, really sad. Let's have a look at you over here. Is that the male? Nope, somewhere there. That's a female. Well, there he is. He's sleeping there. Having a good sleep. So this decline of the species stated 30 years ago has continued to decline at quite an alarming rate, and the dangers of hunters have led to these creatures to fear people. So sightings of these gorillas are actually quite rare. They tend to avoid nesting in grasslands or farmlands, in the case which causes them to remain in forested areas, which are fragmented. and so there's less likely to meet other populations of gorillas. It means that can lead to inbreeding and lose genetic diversity. So that's very, very sad. And actually researching using genetic methods to understand these populations, more specifically the certain loci within the genome, were actually a major concern to give better insight to the subdivisions and dispersal of genetic variation within populations. And surveys suggest that the total population at the moment is about 300 individuals, which is fragmented across 10 different localities with limited reproductive contact. And on top of that, the cross river gorilla is threatened by bushmeat and the use of its bones for pseudoscience medicinal purposes. It's kind of like Chinese medicine, but more localized to Africa, with ritual meanings, and some are regarded as totems and used for tests for medicine. Another threat is also the gorilla pet trade, though to date there's only been one rescued recorded cross-river gorilla in captivity. And although there seems like a small number of gorillas in captivity, the pet trade poses a large threat to other species of gorilla and likely also endangered the cross-river gorilla. And since baby gorillas make much more preferable pets, they'll often kill the parents of the baby, when they try to protect it. And they also were critically endangered due to the combined threats of humans and the infections with Ebola. And even with the rate of Ebola mortality along humans, it was rebated. The promise of these gorillas making a fast recovery is unlikely. The reproduction rate of gorillas in the Cross River is low, and it'll likely take about 75 years for these gorillas to recover. And they're also threatened by habitat loss and all that stuff. But despite this, there is a lot of optimism within their recovery, with the gorillas' chances of survival going up after several adults and babies were actually caught on film in spring of 2020. So that's very interesting to see. But yeah, as we talked about, while all western gorillas are critically endangered, in the case of western lowland due to the Ebola virus, the cross-river gorilla is very endangered, with less than 250 mature individuals, and is considered one of the most endangered, the most endangered great ape. And all those issues we kind of talked about. But luckily there is a lot of conservation work actually happening. There are sanctuaries to protect them, workshops to look into kind of enhancing their survival, and why they should be, why should we conserve them in the first place, and protected areas and monitoring and more study, because we really don't know much about these gorillas. So studying them is a great way to actually help them. So yeah, their future may be looking tentatively bright for these guys. So nice to end that on a little bit more of a positive note. But yeah, really, really cool species. Really, really awesome. So yeah, that's the last one done by Sky Polaris today. Next up, we have got the Victoria crowned pigeon. So let's have a look at these guys as he walks down. I like that they actually climb around and do stuff. That's very, very cool. So the Victoria crowned pigeon, or Gorna Victoria, is a large bluish-green pigeon with quite elegant blue lace-like crests, maroon breasts, and red irises, and is part of the genus Jaguar, which has 4 quite unique, very large species of ground-dwelling pigeons found in New Guinea as well. And they are considered the largest extant species of pigeon, so the largest living pigeon species. So that's quite cool. So as we mentioned before, they are kind of a deep blue-grey colour with a small black mask, and the feather crest, as you can kind of see, is conspicuously white-tipped, which is also a significant feature for these crown parakeets. So you can see, not parakeets, pigeons, so you can see quite obvious there. That's kind of what sets them apart. On the wing coverts, there's a row of feathers that are paler blue-grey and maroon tips, and they form a distinctive wing bar. And the chest itself, as you can see, kind of a beautiful deep purple maroon colour. And in all crown pigeons, melanism has been observed, but the other 2 crown pigeons that look somewhat superficially similar, but only the western crown pigeon overlaps with the species. The ship's marker crown pigeon does not, and in the western one they're more scraggy, but these guys seem to be a little bit more refined, you could say. So this species itself is typically about 73 to 75 centimeters, or about 29 to 30 inches in length, and some specimens may exceed actually 80 centimeters and weigh about 3.5 kilograms, or about 7 pounds, or about 31 inches for the 80 centimeters. They are marginally larger than the other 2 subspecies, or the other 2 species of crown pigeons, with a mean of about 2.39 kilograms, or about 5.3 pounds of adult body mass, and makes it the largest surviving species of pigeon. The standard measurements for these guys, we're not going to go into that. Like other species, they do make quite a loud clapping sound when they take flight, and the A mating call of this species is similar to those of other species of crown pigeons, which have a kind of hoota 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 sound. And when defending their territories, they make a resounding kind of whoop up sound, and they have a contact call that is really deep or muffled and rather human-like that goes or which is very interesting. And there are two different subspecies described. There is Barachi, which is found on the mainland, and the dominant Victoria is found on the islands of Yapen, Bayak, and Sinagori. The dominant subspecies being a little bit smaller and less robust and darker overall pelt, as they're kind of considered island subspecies. Okay, so in terms of habitat, they tend to prefer lowlands and swamp forests of northern New Guinea and the surrounding islands. They usually occur in areas found on alluvial plains, including sago forests. Though typically found near sea level, they have been observed up to about 3,000 feet above sea level. So you can spot another one up there. Let's have a look at you. No, that's what we want. Very, very cool. So in terms of behavior, like other crowned pigeons, they tend to be quite gregarious. They usually travel in pairs or in small parties in search of food. They walk with an unhurried gait along the forest floor, and they typically eat fallen fruits. And birds in the species in captivity are particularly fond of figs, but also seeds and invertebrates may particularly take a part of their diet, a small part of their diet. Or supplement their diet is probably a better way to put it. When disturbed, these birds fly straight up into the canopy or a large horizontal branch in a large forest tree, and after being disturbed, they may actually remain in the perch for actually a decent amount of time, engaging in contact calls and flickering their tails. And in the wild, they tend to be shyer than the western crown pigeon, but they still occasionally can be quietly approached. The males regularly engage in aggressive displays to establish dominance, and these interactions, their pigeons kind of puff up their chests and repeatedly raise their wings as if to prepare to strike the opponent. They also make short dashes into each other and may actually hit one another, but rarely make contact and can be completely peaceful towards other males outside of the early mating season. In terms of reproduction, though, we'll have a look at the cute little babies while we talk about reproduction. Very, very cute little guys. They tend to breed late in the wet season and in the dry season. When males display for females, he lowers his head down, stretches forward, and then rhythmically swings his head up and down while wagging his fanned tail. Although the females does most of the direct breeding, both parents actually help with raising young. The female will usually lay a single white egg in a well-built tree nest of stems, sticks, and palm leaves, and the weeks before she lays the egg, the male will bring nesting material to the female. And the egg is then incubated for about 30 days, and the young will leave the nest when they are still much smaller than their parents, but they're actively tended to for about 13 weeks. So really, really cool species, but they're also considered quite rare. They are considered near threatened, but they are the rarest of all the pigeons, crowned pigeons. So they're now the most rarely occurring of the 3 crowned pigeons in the wild, although they're the one that is most commonly kept in captivity. So they're the rarest in the wild, most common in captivity. Perhaps the most pressing threat is the continued habitat loss due to logging. It is now considered quite uncommon near human habitations because it's heavily hunted, particularly in areas where a lot of people have guns. But it can be quite tame and easily shot, though they now seem to be fearful of humans in the wild. And most hunting is for their plumes and their meat. Trapping of pigeons to be kept alive in captive collections is now illegal, but is still likely to be occurring. And the Victoria crown pigeon is actually considered to be near threatened by the IUCN. Yeah, another really cool species, and it's cool that we get one that actually climbs around and does things. Monsoon really did a good job at making this one a bit more distinct. Definitely a big fan. So next up, we got a couple great cakes mods. We're going to South America for both these species. So here we have got a species of armadillo. This is called Macrauchenia otske, I believe you say that. So let's have a look at these guys here. So that's a big one sleeping. We'll have a look at the other one actually, since it's probably actually doing more interesting things. Really, really cool. So this is Macrauchenia. So these are extinct genus of armadillo that lived from the late Miocene to the late Pliocene of South America, like most other armadillos. And is quite noted for its large size, with Macrauchenia otse actually considered to be the largest non-pampathirid or glyptodont armadillo. So it's the largest armadillo found that is not a glyptodont like Pterodaurus or Glyptodon, or a pampathere, which is another group of large herbivorous armadillos. And also, what's very interesting, it has some specializations for carnivory. So it was actually, this one was probably a large carnivore, which is very interesting as well. There are 3 different species formally recognized at the moment, with Otse being the species here. So the former species, this is also considered a type species, is found in the late Pliocene of Buenos Aires, Argentina, and is considered quite well preserved, and preserves a skull, but also a lot of other cranial elements, post-cranial elements, and it's also represented to be considered to be large, about 100 kilos was some estimates, though it is possible it's actually closer to about 30 kilos, at about 66 pounds, and a little over a meter long. So this is kind of the large estimate, but it still was a very decent predator. And the other 2 species are actually known from central Argentina, the Cerro Azul Formation, and Moroni is from the late Miocene and Pliocene, so maybe the youngest one. So these guys are kind of typically grouped with the affiliates kind of species of armadillos. So they're related to the hairy armadillos, the 6-banded armadillos, and the Peniches armadillos. After it's also named after the practice itself. And most recent phylogenies actually suggest it is in that group, so it is related to kind of hairy armadillos and things like that. But in terms of its biology, it's actually one of the few known xenarthrans that has seemed to have specifically evolved for a carnivorous lifestyle, with modern species like the modern-banded 6-banded armadillo were thought to be fairly dedicated omnivores, but these guys seem to have really specced hard into being large carnivores. And there's a lot of features that suggest that, including large conical caniform teeth and large temporal fossa for bigger jaw muscles, more developed muscles pertaining to the temporalis muscles, as we mentioned before, a deeper rostrum, more powerful anterior teeth or to the back, a deeper and more robust zygomatic arch, and a deeper movement arm for the temporal muscles than other armadillos. So these are all kind of to suggest sharper teeth and big muscles to be able to hunt prey. And this is actually quite unusual among xenarthrans, but makes sense if you look at more predatory mammals. Those are all traits that you see them. And also, like most other armadillos, they are considered fossorial and actually thought to dig out small to medium-sized mammals such as cavomorph rodents, so things like, guinea pigs and maras and capybaras, but, digging ones. Small nodo-ungulates, I think like Pachychronus that we covered a few episodes ago, and other small animals. And species like these were actually quite large, and they may have been a kind of large predator in their ecosystem. But these guys, Morani was actually found to be rather widespread, not this Otse species as well. They played a vital role in various faunal communities in the Miocene and Pliocene epochs of South America, where the other 2 species are more limited to Argentina. So this one seems to be a more limited to Argentina, but Morani species, which is another close relative, managed to actually spread out quite far into, the world. The genus occurs in areas where sparacidonts, forest rachids, and cebechids, which are large land crocodiles, were in decline, and among the various mammals to exploit that kind of ecological niche of apex predator or large predators before a lot of the North American carnivorans, like cats, jaguars and saber-toothed cats and things like that. So they're kind of in that weird in-between. So they managed to come up and, take that niche as a large predator. Although the giant opossums as well, alongside giant opossums such as Athalophorus. But nonetheless, though, these guys would have coexisted with some of the last living sparacidonts, such as Thylacophilus, and forest rachids like Letovirus, which is quite interesting as well. So these guys are very, very interesting. I really like how they reconstructed it. To be honest, I like the hairy banded armadillo, 6-banded armadillo, and the hairy armadillos. Did a really, really good job. I'd love to see a nice reconstruction of this species. So yeah, that's another Great Cakes mod. But last but not least, we're definitely coming another cool Great Cakes mod. I've covered this animal technically before, but that was in a much more inaccurate, older reconstruction. This is a much more accurate reconstruction of the animal Macrauchenia. So let's have a look at this Macrauchenia. Definitely a big fan. Is this the male? Yes, that's the male. Cool. So Macrauchenia, which means long llama, was based on the now invalid llama genus of Acunia. These guys are an extinct genus of large ungulate that is native to South America, or was native from the Pleistocene to the Middle Pleistocene, right up until the end of the late Pleistocene, so went extinct with a lot of the large megafauna at the end of the Pleistocene. It was one of the last members of the extinct order Lithoptera, which is a group of South American native ungulates that was distinct from the other two orders, and that contained all living ungulates that were present in South America during the early Cenozoic up until the last one went extinct in the Holocene. So there were a group of independent South American ungulates. Yeah, I've covered a lot of them before, like Toxodon and Pachycriornis, I believe you say that. We've covered quite a few of these notoungulates in the past, so that's quite cool. In terms of taxonomy, it was first found in 9th of February 1834 in southern Patagonia by Charles Darwin at Port St. Julian on the HMS Beagle. He kind of tentatively actually found it was some large animal, some fancy a mastodon, but it was actually found to resemble the back and neck, and those bones resembled a llama or a camel, while Owen named it Macrauchenia and Patagonian, and in naming it, he originally used the name large or long and then neck. And Archernia was actually the generic name for llamas and vicuñas and so on. And now Macrauchenia is actually considered the only valid species within the genus Macrauchenia. There was also Boliviensis, but there was actually considered to be an immediate member. And there's a couple other subspecies, other species that have been put into other genera like Macrauchenia leposus, but this is the only genus and only species in the genus Macrauchenia. So in terms of evolution, as I mentioned, it's an extinct ungulate group called Lithoptera, which is a different family within the order of the South American native ungulates, or notoungulates is what they're called, a group of independent ungulates that lived in South America from the early Cenozoic right until the end of the Pleistocene and the Holocene, where they all went extinct. And they actually have a look at DNA from animals like Macrauchenia, and they found that the closest living relatives of Macrauchenia would have included pterodactyls, including equids such horses, rhinos, and tapirs, and they would have been genetically distinct to them for about 66 million years, so they would have split off at the time the dinosaurs went extinct. And an analysis of collagen, but also things like Toxodon, also belongs to the other notoungulates, suggests that these guys were more closely related to notoungulates than pterodactyls. So they seem to be this own big group of ungulates that were found in North America that were very distantly related to things like pterodactyls. The earliest known fossils of these guys come from the early Paleogene, about 62 million years ago, and the family which Macrauchenia belongs to evolved in the late Eocene or Oligocene, about 30 million years ago, 39 million years ago, and they had these long necks and three-toed feet, which is characteristics of Macrauchenia. The family reached apex at the late Miocene about 10 to 6 million years ago, and then declined up until the Pliocene and Pleistocene, which is part of a broader decline in these species with the Great American Interchange as well. So with species coming down from North America, likely a lot of these species got outcompeted, but also things like climate is thought to be a big issue as well. But yeah, these guys would have been the last of the species of the Macrauchenidae, and went extinct during the late Pleistocene. So these are kind of the last of them. So in terms of description, this guy is very much very similar like a camel, with a long neck composed of long elongated central vertebrae like a camel or a giraffe. And most of its cervical vertebrae, the canal of the artery passes through the neural arch. And this is one of the largest Macraucheniids and one of the largest species of South American ungulates. It was estimated to be about a ton, which was considerably larger than most other early members of its group, which only got up to about 120 kilos at most. This is considered quite a large one. So what makes this guy weird as well is it has a relatively elongate skull with an eye socket entirely enclosed by bone, which is situated above the teeth, and they had quite a lot of teeth as well. But the most unusual feature is that if you look at the skull of Macrauchenia, it has its nares basically between the eyes, very similar to things like whales, animals with trunks like elephants and tapirs, but also sauropod dinosaurs. So there's a lot of really interesting there. So it's on the top of the skull roof between the eye sockets. And because of this, a lot of people, and you look at animals like that, like elephants and things like that, they were like, oh, maybe this supports some sort of trunk. And a lot of early reconstructions, like the one that Leaf did, the Macrauchenia with the trunk, they reconstructed it with a trunk like, a tapir or an elephant. But it seems like there was not enough musculature or evidence of the musculature that would have supported a trunk. So there were a lot of muscle scars on the bone that suggest they would have had large muscles for moving trunk around. But the only similarity these Macrauchenia skull had to elephants and tapirs and sauropod dinosaurs is really only that it had His nares were in the middle of the eye socket, in the middle of the head between the eyes. But most authors have suggested, in terms of that, because they didn't have those quite large muscles, suggested that if you wanted to reconstruct the animal, it would have a much more moose-like prehensile lip, or a saga antelope-like nasal structure to filter, like saga antelope to filter dust from the air, which is actually quite likely considering Macrauchenia lived in open areas with lots of dust. Perhaps combining this function, be prehensile lip as well. Maybe they've done a lot more browsing and grazing, eating more like a rhinoceros, and then, they had the... So yeah, this is a much more scientifically accurate, or more scientifically plausible reconstruction than the old Walking with Beasts, or, Ice Age movies with the trunk. This is much more like a saiga antelope or a moose with a prehensile lip and, also, big nose. That's probably a much more accurate reconstruction than Leaf's one. But it's fine. This is just the accurate one. You can have your classic Walking with Beasts one from Leaf. And also had very robust limbs, which is quite interesting as well. So that seems it would have been quite good. They have a lot of adaptations actually found in living horses, allowing them their knees to stay passively locked when standing, so that they didn't have to put any effort. So a lot of adaptations for living in open areas. But yeah, I really do love this reconstruction. It's a much more accurate Macrauchenia to how it actually would have looked in life. Macrauchenia is also known from the southern cone. It's from northern Chile, southern Peru, and the Pampas, southern Brazil, southwestern Patagonia, and Argentina. So it may have actually lived in more open areas that were arid and scattered vegetation, but a close relative of the species called Xenorhinotherium would have lived in more tropical areas in eastern Brazil and Venezuela. So it was a group that kind of lived all over the place in South America, and yeah, this would have been more the cold version that lived in cold areas. In terms of its dental anatomy, looking at it, it suggests that it was a mixed feeder. So looking at both dental caucuses and looking at the microwear on the teeth and isotopes suggesting they would have eaten a lot of C3 grasses as well. So they would have been mainly grazers, but they would have been also most likely being a mixed grazer, so eating a bit of plants as well. And like living perissodactyls, these guys would have been hindgut fermenters. And a 2022 study actually looked at the anatomy of this and found that they held their neck in an erect position while rest and browsing, similar to llamas. So they would have held their necks up high, necks are held high, like a llama or a camel. And the neck was highly flexible and would have been quite well, to adapt to many poses to lower the ground and flexing side to side. So they would actually also speculate to be eating like a gurnuk, get up on their hind legs. That's another potential thing they could have done. They also potentially would have lived in herds, as there has been at least 3 individuals preserved in the Jaguar site in Chile, and they've also suggested to be foraging in small areas before swiftly moving on. And there's also been suggested they may have engaged in long migrations. In like living animals of similar size, they would have given birth to single offspring at a time, as we can see in that herd there. But another really cool, there is a 2020 study that looked into Macrauchenia and suggested it was a fast and capable runner, with fossilized footprints suggesting that they had a digigrade stance. So these are the digits here. They would have walked on their toes, not on their feet like bears. They would have been on their toes, like a lot of like wolves and a lot of ungulates. So they suggested it would have been quite good at running, and the necks would have been held horizontal while running. The running style has been suggested to be like that of a spotted hyena or a saiga antelope, with a lack of flexing in the spine. And 2005 study suggests it may have adapted to swerving as a strategy to avoid predators. Based on the strength of its limbos, it may have actually swerved to avoid predators. And the morphology of its hind limbs suggests they were adapted for rapidly accelerating, being useful for both efficient locomotion and escaping predators. And they were actually consumed a lot by predators. They were actually thought to be quite favourite prey, or, favourite prey for animals like Smilodon populata, which is a large saber-toothed cat. So they would have been quite important for these guys. But yeah, I'm really, really like this reconstruction, very much more modern interpretation of Macrauchenia, but more accurate to what we actually think. So that's a great example of a paleo meme. Everyone kind of ran with the trunk because you think, it's got holes in the middle of the eye socket, between the eye sockets, like elephants and sauropod dinosaurs, and they think, trunk. But actually, there's a lot more that goes into having a trunk, because there's a lot of muscles to a trunk. that you only have muscle scars that actually anchor those muscles to the skull, and there was not a lot of evidence seen in those kind of muscle scars. It's the same muscle scars that you see in tapirs and elephants, which have developed proboscises or developed trunks, were not really seen in Macrauchenia. But yeah, this is one of those big species that went extinct at the end of the Pleistocene, with a lot of the other megafauna. Already kind of covered this, even in this video with the Patagonian Jaguar. We didn't know exactly what happened. They likely could have been, humans or climate change or disease or a combination of all those factors. But we think that these guys would have became extinct about, 10,000 years ago. And the youngest kind of sites, and there are sites of Macrauchenia that have been associated with human artifacts, so they may have been likely there were bones with cut marks and stuff. They would have actually hunted and killed Macrauchenia, these ancient peoples. There's also burned bones of Macrauchenia found in other sites as well, so they were definitely at least used by people, whether they hunted them or chopped them up. I would likely think they probably definitely hunted them to some extent, but they likely could have just scavenged on dead carcasses and things like that. But yeah, there is a lot of evidence that suggests they may have been hunted or at least used by people. With stone tools and stuff like that found near them. And there's it's not really clear evidence that they were hunted, but there's evidence that definitely people came and used these things, probably to extract the tongue or, cut marks. And they even used their bones as fuel for fires as well, as is evidence of burnt bones. But we don't necessarily know that they actually hunted them. But even with what I've said before and a couple times, these large species that are quite slow at reproducing are very vulnerable to hunting. So even if they weren't getting hunted, like a massacre, you just see killing Macrauchenia, they see killing enough babies or killing enough could have actually severely hurted the population just because they have such a slow recovery time. Just hunting a few of them could have actually hurt the population just because they're, such slow breeders and takes such a long time to recover from a death. So yeah, that kind of brings a more realistic approach to the, overkill hypothesis. But really, could have been a lot of factors. But yeah, I think this is a great place to end it. So I'm going to thank everyone, Thank you, Great Cakes. You've done a wonderful job with your extinct South American animals. Sky Polaris, you've done a really great job with all your really interesting subspecies that you've done. I like the Patagonian Jaguar, and the Cross River Gorilla one's quite cool. And Monsoon, of course, you did a great job with your Victoria Crowned Parakeet. Nice to sneak, not parakeet, pigeon. I keep saying parakeet, but it's pigeon. The Victoria Crowned Pigeon. You did a great job with that. Nice to see some variety of, not just mammals today. Nice to see some birds as well. But yeah, I really, really, really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to get the little bell icon to get notified about anything. So if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.